500 years of kings, 42 rulers, and one very messy family tree. The French monarchy wasn't just about crowns and castles. It was about power, survival, and figuring out how to keep your head attached to your body, literally. From the moment the Franks carved out a kingdom in the ashes of Rome to the guillotine that ended it all, every French monarch faced the same question. How do you rule a country that loves revolution almost as much as wine? We're starting in 481 with Clovis, the man who basically invented France, and racing through 15 centuries of triumph, disaster, and enough family drama to fill a Netflix series. Some of these rulers changed the world. Others barely changed their clothes. But each one shaped what France became. Let's begin with the man who started it all. Clovis I becomes king of the Franks at 15 years old in 481. This isn't some peaceful transition. His father Childeric just died, and young Clovis has to prove he deserves the throne by doing what every Frankish king does, conquering everything in sight. He unifies the Frankish tribes through a combination of military genius and strategic marriages, which is basically the medieval version of a networking. But here's what makes Clovis different. In 496, he converts to Christianity. Not just any Christianity, but Catholic Christianity, which matters because most Germanic tribes at the time follow Arianism, a different branch that the Roman Church considers heresy. This one decision changes everything. The Catholic Church backs him, giving him legitimacy no other barbarian king possesses. By the time he dies in 511, Clovis controls most of modern France and parts of Germany. He's created something that will eventually become the French nation. The problem? Frankish inheritance law says you divide the kingdom among all your sons. 4 sons, 4 kingdoms. This tradition will haunt French history for centuries. The next 200 years are chaos. Kings rise and fall. Brothers fight brothers. The Merovingian dynasty, Clovis's descendants gradually lose real power to their own officials, called mayors of the palace. These mayors run everything, while the kings become ceremonial figureheads, literally called the do-nothing kings. Then, in 751, one mayor decides he's done pretending. Pepin the Short, yes, that's his actual name, asks the Pope a simple question. Who should be king, the person with the title or the person with the power? The Pope chooses power. Pepin becomes king, founding the Carolingian dynasty, and the last Merovingian king gets his head shaved and sent to a monastery. Pepin's son changes European history forever. Charlemagne rules from 768 to 814, and calling him ambitious is like calling the ocean damp. He conquers the Lombards in Italy, crushes the Saxons in Germany, pushes into Spain against the Muslims, and creates an empire that hasn't existed since Rome fell 3 centuries earlier. On Christmas Day 800, Pope Leo III crowns him Emperor of the Romans. The Roman Empire is back, sort of, now called the Holy Roman Empire. But Charlemagne isn't just a warrior. He establishes schools, standardizes currency, promotes learning, and creates an administrative system that actually functions. His court at Aachen becomes Europe's cultural center. Scholars call this the Carolingian Renaissance, a burst of learning in the middle of the Dark Ages. The empire doesn't survive him. His son Louis the Pious tries to hold it together, but after Louis dies in 840, his 3 sons do what royal brothers do best: fight a civil war. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 splits the empire three ways. Charles the Bald gets the western chunk, which becomes France. The Carolingian dynasty continues, but they're ruling a much smaller kingdom now. The next century and a half sees 14 Carolingian kings, and honestly, most of them are forgettable. They're constantly fighting Vikings, raiding up French rivers, dealing with rebellious nobles, and watching their power slowly drain away to local lords who actually control the land and armies. By 987, the Carolingian line produces Louis V, who dies after ruling for 1 year, possibly poisoned. The French nobles need a new king, and they make a calculated choice. They pick Hugh Capet, a powerful duke who controls the area around Paris, but isn't threatening enough to scare the other nobles. The Capetian dynasty begins, and unlike the Carolingians, they'll figure out how to keep power in the family for over 300 years. Hugh Capet rules from 987 to 996, and his reign establishes a pattern his descendants will follow. Keep Paris as your base, make alliances through marriage, and crown your son as co-king while you're still alive to prevent succession disputes. It works. His son Robert II takes over smoothly. The early Capetians are patient builders. Robert II, Henry I, Philip I, each one slowly expands royal authority, one castle at a time, one marriage alliance at a time, one legal precedent at a time. They're not trying to reconquer Charlemagne's empire. They're trying to actually control the area around Paris, which is harder than it sounds, because every local lord has his own castle, army, and ideas about independence. Then comes Louis VI, who rules from 1108 to 1137, and he's done being patient. He spends his entire reign fighting the robber barons who control castles near Paris and terrorize travelers. He tears down their fortifications, hangs the worst offenders, and establishes that the king's justice actually means something. He's too fat to ride a horse by the end of his reign, but he's made the Île-de-France, the royal domain around Paris, actually safe. His son Louis VII takes a different approach. He goes on crusade, which seems like a great idea until his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine gets bored with him in the Holy Land. They divorce, and she immediately marries Henry Plantagenet, who becomes King of England 2 years later. Suddenly, the English king controls more of France than the French king does. This marriage will cause 300 years of war. But that war hasn't started yet. We're still in the 12th century, and the Capetian kings are about to produce their greatest ruler, a man who will transform France from a weak collection of feudal territories into the most powerful kingdom in Europe. Philip II takes the throne in 1180 at age 15, and he's about to earn a nickname that will stick for 800 years. Philip Augustus. Augustus, as in the Roman emperor. That's how significant his reign becomes. He inherits a kingdom where the English king controls Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, basically the entire western half of what we call France today. Philip spends his first decade just surviving, making temporary alliances, learning how power actually works. Then, in 1190, he goes on crusade with Richard the Lionheart of England. They hate each other immediately. Philip comes home early, and while Richard is off fighting Saladin, Philip starts quietly taking Richard's French territories. When Richard finally returns and figures out what's happening, he's furious. They fight for years until an arrow kills Richard at a minor siege in 1199. Richard's brother John takes the English throne, and John is incompetent. Philip sees his opportunity and takes it. Between 1202 and 1204, Philip conquers Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Touraine. The English lose almost everything they held in France. It's the single greatest expansion of French royal power in centuries. And Philip does it through a combination of military skill, legal maneuvering, and exploiting John's mistakes. But territory means nothing if you can't defend it. Philip builds castles, lots of them. He fortifies Paris itself, constructing the first Louvre, not the museum you know today, but a massive fortress with towers and walls to protect the city from attack. He paves the streets of Paris, literally the first time anyone's done that, because he's tired of the smell and mud. He reorganizes royal finances, creates a professional bureaucracy, establishes a standing army. He's building the infrastructure of a real state, not just a collection of personal territories held together by feudal oaths. In 1214, everything comes to a head at the Battle of Bouvines. John of England, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Count of Flanders form a massive coalition to crush Philip and take back their lost territories. It's one of the most important battles in European history that nobody remembers. Philip's outnumbered, but he wins decisively. The victory confirms French control over the territories Philip conquered and establishes France as the dominant power in Western Europe. John goes home humiliated, and his barons force him to sign the Magna Carta the following year, partly because he lost so badly to Philip. Philip Augustus dies in 1223 after 43 years on the throne, and he's transformed France completely. The royal domain has tripled in size. Paris has become a real capital city with paved streets, walls, and a fortress palace. The French monarchy has administrative structures that actually work. His son Louis VIII rules for only 3 years before dying, but he continues his father's policies, conquering more territory in the south. Then comes Louis IX, and French history takes a very different turn. Louis becomes king in 1226 at age 12. His mother Blanche of Castile rules as regent, and she's brilliant, holding the kingdom together against rebellious nobles who think they can take advantage of a child king. Louis grows up watching her political skill, learning how to balance force and diplomacy. When he takes full power in his 20s, he's deeply religious, almost fanatically so. He goes on 2 crusades, the first in 1248 to Egypt, where he's captured and has to be ransomed, humiliating but not fatal to his reputation. The Second Crusade in 1270 to Tunis, where he catches dysentery and dies. But between the crusades, Louis transforms France's legal system. He establishes the principle that royal justice supersedes local justice, that appeals can go directly to the king's court. He creates the Parlement of Paris, not a legislature, but a supreme court that standardizes law across the kingdom. He bans trial by combat and private warfare between nobles. He's trying to replace feudal chaos with royal law, and largely he succeeds. Louis is also obsessively fair in a way that sometimes works against French interests. He negotiates peace with England in 1259, giving back some territories his grandfather conquered because he thinks it's the just thing to do. His advisors think he's insane, but the treaty establishes a lasting peace with England, at least for a while. He mediates disputes between other kingdoms, becoming Europe's unofficial judge. He builds Sainte-Chapelle in Paris to house the Crown of Thorns, creating one of the most beautiful Gothic churches ever constructed. When he dies in 1270, he's immediately recognized as a saint. He's the only French king ever canonized, and his reputation as Louis the Saint establishes the French monarchy as divinely sanctioned in ways that will echo for centuries. His son Philip III continues the expansion southward, but it's Philip IV, Louis's grandson, who takes the throne in 1285 and pushes royal power to new extremes. Philip the Fair, they call him, referring to his appearance, not his character. He's ruthless, calculating, and absolutely determined to make the French king the supreme authority in his kingdom, answerable to no one, not even the Pope. That determination is about to trigger one of the strangest and most brutal episodes in medieval history, one that will haunt France for generations and create legends that persist to this day. What Philip does next will shock Christendom and demonstrate just how far the French monarchy has come from the weak kings who could barely control Paris 2 centuries earlier. Philip IV needs money. Wars are expensive, the royal bureaucracy is growing, and the king has ambitions that require funding. The problem is that the church owns about a third of France and pays no taxes. So in 1296, Philip simply starts taxing church property anyway. Pope Boniface VIII is furious. He issues a papal bull declaring that kings have no authority to tax clergy without papal permission. Philip's response is to ban the export of gold and silver from France, cutting off papal revenue. The Pope backs down temporarily, but the conflict is just beginning. In 1301, Philip arrests a French bishop for treason. Boniface explodes, issuing another bull, declaring that the Pope has supreme authority over all kings, that temporal power must submit to spiritual power. Philip calls an assembly of French nobles, clergy, and townspeople, the first meeting of what will become the Estates General. He gets them to support him against the Pope, creating the first real assertion of French national unity against external authority. Then in 1303, Philip sends his chief minister, Guillaume de Nogaret, to Italy with a small army. They break into the papal palace at Anagni and physically assault the 86-year-old Pope. They hold him prisoner for 3 days before locals rescue him. Boniface dies a month later, probably from the shock. Philip has just attacked the Pope himself, something unthinkable a century earlier. He gets away with it. The next Pope dies after 8 months. Then in 1305, a Frenchman becomes Pope Clement V, and he never even goes to Rome. He sets up in Avignon, technically outside French territory, but completely under French influence. For the next 70 years, the papacy will be based in France, not Italy. The Avignon papacy, or as the Italians bitterly call it, the Babylonian captivity of the church. But Philip isn't done. He's still broke. He's debased the currency so much that riots break out in Paris. He needs a major source of revenue. The Knights Templar, the wealthy military order that started during the Crusades, has become essentially an international banking network. They're rich, they're independent, and they operate outside normal royal control. Perfect target. On Friday, October 13, 1307, Philip orders the simultaneous arrest of every Templar in France. Hundreds are seized in a coordinated dawn raid. The charges are spectacular: heresy, devil worship, spitting on the cross, obscene rituals. Almost certainly fabricated, but under torture many Templars confess. The trials drag on for years. In 1312, Pope Clement, under intense pressure from Philip, officially dissolves the order. In 1314, the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, is burned at the stake in Paris. According to legend, he curses both Philip and Clement from the flames, prophesying that they'll meet him before God within a year. Clement dies a month later. Philip dies in November. Coincidence or divine judgment, the story becomes part of French folklore. Philip IV dies in 1314, and his sons inherit the throne in succession. Louis X rules for 2 years, Philip V for 6, Charles IV for 6 more. Then in 1328, Charles dies without a male heir. For the first time since 987, the direct male line of Capetian kings has ended. The throne passes to Philip VI, a cousin from a junior branch. But there's another claimant with a potentially stronger claim. King Edward III of England is the grandson of Philip IV through his mother. The French nobility invoke an obscure legal principle they claim comes from the ancient Salian Franks. Women cannot inherit the throne, nor can they transmit a claim to it. The Salic law. It's probably invented specifically to exclude Edward, but it becomes the justification. Edward initially accepts it. He's young, just crowned, dealing with Scottish wars. But 15 years later, in 1337, when Philip VI confiscates English territories in France, Edward renews his claim to the French throne. The 100 Years' War begins. It's not really a single war, but a series of conflicts that will last, with interruptions, until 1453. In the early stages, England dominates militarily. English longbowmen destroy French knights at Crécy in 1346, then at Poitiers in 1356, where they capture the French king himself, John II. France is humiliated, forced to sign treaties giving England massive territories. But France is larger, richer, more populous. Time is on their side if they can just survive. Then in 1348, something arrives in France that makes war seem almost irrelevant. Ships from the east bring rats. On the rats, fleas. In the fleas, Yersinia pestis, the Black Death. The plague spreads through France with horrifying speed. Perhaps a third of the population dies, maybe more. Entire villages are abandoned. Fields lie untended. The economy collapses. Social order breaks down. And yet France endures. The monarchy survives. The wars continue, though with less intensity for a few decades. By 1400, France has recovered enough population and stability to push back against England. Charles V, who rules from 1364 to 1380, reconquers most of the lost territory through careful strategy rather than pitched battles. His son Charles VI goes mad, literally, suffering from recurring psychosis that leaves him believing he's made of glass and might shatter. The nobility fights over control of the regency. England invades again under Henry V, winning a crushing victory at Agincourt in 1415. By 1420, through the Treaty of Troyes, Henry is recognized as heir to the French throne. Charles VI's own son, the Dauphin Charles, is disinherited. France seems finished. The English control Paris and most of the north. The French king has disowned his heir. The kingdom is on the verge of ceasing to exist as an independent state. And that's when a 17-year-old peasant girl from Lorraine appears, claiming God has sent her to save France. Part Philip targets the Knights Templar. These warrior monks started during the Crusades as protectors of Christian pilgrims, but by 1300 they've evolved into something completely different, an international banking network with fortresses across Europe, massive wealth, and independence from any king's authority. They answer only to the Pope. Philip can't control them, can't tax them, and desperately needs their money. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Philip executes the most coordinated police operation medieval Europe has ever seen. At dawn, royal officials simultaneously arrest every Templar in France. Hundreds of knights seized in a single morning. The charges are deliberately sensational: heresy, devil worship, spitting on the cross during secret initiation rituals. Almost certainly fabricated, but under torture, confessions come quickly. The trials drag on for 5 years. Pope Clement V, already Philip's puppet in Avignon, officially dissolves the Templar order in 1312. 2 years later, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, is burned at the stake on an island in the Seine. Legend says he curses Philip and Clement from the flames, prophesying they'll both meet him before God within a year. Clement dies within a month. Philip dies 8 months later while hunting. Coincidence becomes folklore. Philip leaves 3 sons who inherit in succession. Louis X rules 2 years before dying, possibly poisoned. Philip V takes over for 6 years. Charles IV lasts another 6. Then in 1328, Charles dies without sons. The direct male line of Capetian kings, unbroken since 987, ends after 341 years. The crown passes to Philip of Valois, a cousin from a junior branch. He becomes Philip VI. But there's another candidate with arguably a stronger claim: Edward III of England, grandson of Philip IV through his mother Isabella. The French nobility suddenly discover an ancient legal principle they claim comes from the Salian Franks. Women cannot inherit the crown, nor can they transmit inheritance rights through the female line. The Salic Law. Probably invented on the spot to exclude Edward, but it becomes permanent French constitutional law. Edward accepts this initially. He's 23, just crowned, busy fighting Scotland. But in 1337, when Philip confiscates English territories in Gascony, Edward formally claims the French throne. The 100 Years' War begins, though calling it one war is misleading. It's really a series of conflicts spanning 116 years with long truces in between. England dominates the early decades through superior military tactics. At Crécy in 1346, English longbowmen slaughter French cavalry. 10 years later at Poitiers, they do it again, this time capturing King John II himself. France is forced to sign humiliating treaties, surrendering massive territories and paying enormous ransoms. But France has advantages England can't match: 3 times the population, far more wealth, and they're fighting on home territory. Charles V, who rules from 1364 to 1380, refuses pitched battles. He rebuilds the army, improves fortifications, and slowly reconquers lost territory through sieges and raids. By his death, France has recovered most of what was lost. Then, his son Charles VI goes mad, actually clinically insane. He suffers episodes where he believes he's made of glass and will shatter if touched. Sometimes he doesn't recognize his wife or children. Sometimes he runs through the palace howling. During his lucid periods, which become rarer, he's a decent king. During the mad periods, which last months, France descends into chaos as noble factions fight for control. England invades again in 1415 under Henry V. At Agincourt, English longbowmen annihilate another French army. Henry conquers Normandy systematically, taking town after town. And by 1420, he's forced the Treaty of Troyes on the defeated French. Henry will marry Charles VI's daughter Catherine and become heir to the French throne. Charles's own son, the Dauphin Charles, is disinherited, declared illegitimate. Henry controls Paris and northern France. The English dream of ruling France seems inevitable. Then Henry dies in 1422 of dysentery at 35. Charles VI dies 2 months later. Henry's infant son becomes Henry VI of England, and according to the Treaty of Troyes, Henry II of France. But the disinherited Dauphin declares himself Charles VII. France now has 2 kings, an English baby in Paris and a French prince in Bourges, whom his enemies mockingly call the King of Bourges. By 1429, the English control everything north of the Loire River. Orléans, the gateway to the south, is under siege. If Orléans falls, the English will control all of France. The Dauphin's position seems hopeless. His own mother signed the treaty disinheriting him. The French nobility is divided. The treasury is empty. England has won. Then, in February 1429, a 17-year-old peasant girl from Domremy arrives at the Dauphin's court, claiming voices from God sent her to save France. Joan of Arc. She's illiterate, has never held a sword, knows nothing about warfare. She should be dismissed immediately. Instead, theologians examine her, find no heresy, and the desperate Dauphin gives her armor and troops. In April, she enters Orléans. 10 days later, the English lift the siege. The relief of Orléans is Joan's first miracle, though calling it a miracle misses the point. Her presence galvanizes the French forces. Soldiers who've been losing for decades suddenly believe they can win. Over the next few months, Joan liberates town after town. In July, she escorts Charles to Reims for his coronation. French kings are traditionally crowned there, and the ceremony transforms Charles from a doubtful claimant into an anointed monarch. Joan stands beside him, holding her banner. She's achieved what she promised. The Dauphin is now King Charles VII. The following year, Joan is captured by Burgundian allies of England and sold to the English. They try her for heresy and witchcraft in Rouen. The trial is a farce, predetermined. Joan defends herself brilliantly despite having no legal training, but the outcome is inevitable. On May 30th, 1431, she's burned at the stake in Rouen's marketplace at 19 years old. The English expect her death to demoralize France. Instead, she becomes a martyr. Charles VII spends the next 20 years methodically reconquering France. He reforms the army, creates the first standing military force in Europe, establishes permanent taxation. By 1453, the English hold only Calais. The 100 Years' War is over. France has survived. Charles's son, Louis XI, who rules from 1461 to 1483, continues building royal power through less dramatic but equally effective methods. He's devious, paranoid, and brilliant at playing nobles against each other. He destroys the last major independent noble houses, particularly Burgundy, bringing their territories under direct royal control. By his death, France is unified under a strong central monarchy in a way it hasn't been since Charlemagne. Louis XI's son, Charles VIII, inherits a powerful, wealthy, unified kingdom, and he immediately decides to invade Italy. This begins 60 years of Italian wars that accomplish almost nothing strategically, but drain French resources and introduce French nobility to Italian Renaissance culture, which they bring home. Francis I, who rules from 1515 to 1547, is the ultimate Renaissance king, patron of Leonardo da Vinci, builder of Chambord and Fontainebleau, promoter of French arts and literature. He makes French, not Latin, the official language of government. But Francis also spends his reign at war with Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, fighting over Italy and European dominance. These wars cost fortunes and achieve little. Francis is even captured at the Battle of Pavia in 1525, imprisoned in Madrid for a year. Yet French culture flourishes. The chateaux of the Loire Valley rise during this period, architectural statements of royal power and sophistication. The next crisis comes from within. In 1559, Henry II dies in a jousting accident when a lance splinter pierces his eye. His 15-year-old son, Francis II, takes the throne. Francis is married to Mary, Queen of Scots, but he's sickly and dominated by the ultra-Catholic Guy's family. He dies after 17 months. His 10-year-old brother, Charles IX, becomes king with their mother, Catherine de' Medici, as regent. Catherine will dominate French politics for the next 30 years through 3 of her sons' reigns. France is splitting along religious lines. Protestant ideas from Luther and Calvin are spreading. French Protestants, called Huguenots, are particularly strong among the nobility and merchant classes. The Catholic majority sees them as heretics. Violence erupts. The wars of religion begin in 1562 and will devastate France for the next 36 years. The worst moment comes on August 24th, 1572, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Thousands of Huguenots are in Paris for a royal wedding meant to reconcile the factions. Instead, Catholic mobs hunt down and murder Huguenots throughout the city. Bodies fill the Seine. The killing spreads to other cities. Perhaps 70,000 Protestants die nationwide. The massacre shocks Europe and guarantees the wars will continue. Charles IX dies in 1574. His brother Henry III becomes king, but he's weak and the kingdom is fragmenting. In 1589, a Catholic fanatic assassinates him. The Valois dynasty ends. The crown passes to Henry of Navarre, a Protestant cousin, who becomes Henry IV. But most of France refuses to accept a Protestant king. Henry converts to Catholicism in 1593, supposedly saying Paris is worth a mass, though that's probably apocryphal. He enters Paris the following year and begins rebuilding the shattered kingdom. In 1598, he issues the Edict of Nantes, granting Huguenots freedom of worship in certain areas. It's not complete religious freedom, but it's peace. Henry IV revitalizes France. He repairs roads, encourages agriculture, reduces taxes, builds the Pont Neuf Bridge in Paris. His chief minister, the Duke of Sully, reorganizes royal finances. By 1610, France is recovering. Then a Catholic fanatic stabs Henry to death in his carriage. His 9-year-old son becomes Louis XIII. Another child king means another regency, this time by Henry's widow, Marie de Medici. She's incompetent, manipulated by favorites. When Louis takes power at 16, France is drifting. Then in 1624, Louis appoints Cardinal Richelieu as chief minister. Richelieu will dominate France for the next 18 years until his death in 1642. He's ruthless, brilliant, and absolutely focused on strengthening royal power. He crushes Huguenot political power, destroys rebellious noble fortresses, and involves France in the 30 Years' War to weaken the Habsburgs. Everything serves the state, which serves the king. Louis dies in 1643, just months after Richelieu. His 5-year-old son becomes Louis XIV, the Sun King, who will rule for 72 years and transform France into Europe's dominant power. But that's another story, one that begins with a child king and ends with the monarchy at its absolute peak before the long decline toward revolution. From Clovis to Louis XIV spans nearly 12 centuries, 42 kings, some brilliant, some incompetent, most somewhere between. They built France from Frankish tribes into a centralized nation-state. They survived Vikings, plagues, English invasions, religious wars, and their own family feuds. The monarchy that ends in 1792 with Louis XVI's execution has roots reaching back to Roman collapse. Understanding these rulers means understanding how France itself was created through centuries of war, diplomacy, and the stubborn determination of kings who refused to let their kingdom disappear. From Clovis uniting the Franks in 481 to the Revolution ending it all in 1792, the French monarchy shaped European history through 13 centuries of conquest, survival, and reinvention. These 42 rulers built a nation from tribal chaos, survived disasters that should have destroyed them, and created institutions that outlasted the crown itself. Some changed the world, others barely held on. But each one faced the same challenge: how to keep power in a country that never stopped questioning who deserved to rule. The monarchy ended, but France endured, built on foundations these kings spent centuries laying.